Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to the April 4th Learning Services Lunchtime Hot Topics. We've got a host of items on the agenda today. This is Brad Neuenswander, Deputy Commissioner, and we're going to be going through some updates, getting towards the end of the year. It's always exciting how fast the spring goes. Maybe it's just exciting for me because I'm still healthy and time's moving fast. But we're going to start out with John Girodat, who's going to give an update on chronic absenteeism. This is something that we want to make sure that you're aware of not only the data but how we're defining it, and this is one of the key indicators early on of the success of a child, just their absenteeism. And so John's going to give you an update on kind of this language that we refer to as chronic absenteeism. Followed, Julie Ewing's going to give you an update on kindergarten readiness. As everybody knows, we've been training kindergarten teachers and school districts all across the state this year in order to be ready at the start of next school year to be able to really see where our kids are socially, emotionally, and academically, their readiness once they enter kindergarten. This is obviously one of the board outcomes, and one of the areas when Randy and I and the board went on our tour that Kansan said we have got to focus on early childhood and ensuring that they show up to kindergarten ready. So Julie will be giving you an update on that. Tate has several items that he wants to just keep on your radar, including services to our non-public schools, the rules around supplement and not supplant, and as well as some updates on title funding. Obviously, we're in the process of building our ESSA plan that we received approval on back in late December, early January. There's some changes in title funding, but overall funding from the U.S. Department of Ed is either flat or maybe just a little bit increased, but Tate's going to give you some updates on that. And then Kent Reed's going to provide an update on individual plans of study. So it's a full agenda today. So we hope you find some things useful in it. I want to remind everybody that our Summer Impact Institutes, they're the Kansans Can Teach, and one of them is in Emporia, June 4th and 5th. You can go onto our website and register for it. And then we're hosting one in July at Fort Hays. These I can't stress, these are just great opportunities, especially for your teachers or your staff that have a hard time getting plugged in to some of our events during the school year. We normally we'll have several hundred teachers that this is a great experience for them to get plugged into the board outcomes, the Kansans Can vision, and what we're doing, the initiatives we have in the state. So want to just remind everybody you can find this on our website to get staff enrolled and send a team. The registration, we try to hold that cost down. It's only $25 a person for the 2-day conference. That includes meals. But again, it's just a good way to get some of your staff plugged in during the summer. Also want to remind everybody that the Summer Leadership Conference for administrators, July 25th through 26th, is in Wichita. And also to put on your calendar, the fall conference is October 15th through 17th, always at the Hyatt in Wichita. Now, I want to let you know that in the past several years, the pre-conference, which is the first day, has always been around assessments. We're looking at next year moving some assessment sessions into the main conference, and we're going to repurpose the pre-conference, which will be the 15th, that Monday. We're going to build that around redesign. We want to spend a day for school districts, teachers, administrators, board members, whoever want to learn a little more about what we're doing, what our Mercury 7, what our Gemini, just a whole concept about redesign. So we're going to repurpose that first day, the pre-conference, on having it about redesign. So we're excited about that. And obviously, keep your eyes and ears open for more information on that. And again, as always, if you have topics, if you have questions, if you anything relative to these lunchtime hot topics, you can email us at lunchtime@ksde.org. So we're excited about where we're at as a state. It's been a great year moving forward, and we'll move on with the rest of the presentation. So thanks for being on board.
Hello, my name is John Girodat. I'm an education program consultant with the Career Standards and Assessment Services team within Kansas Department of Education. I work primarily with graduation, with virtual and charter schools as well. Today's topic is chronic absenteeism and the link between chronic absenteeism and student dropout. Why is graduating a big deal? This is something I think we all know, but the economic impact for individuals of dropping out is significant. A person without a diploma, the median weekly salary is $504 per week for those students. With a high school diploma, that number increases to $692 median income per week. So a significant economic impact for that diploma. Also, a drop in unemployment rate from 7.4% without a high school diploma down to 5.2% with a high school diploma. And you can see that number continues to drop the more education, the more certificates, the more pieces of paper you get up the line. So an economic impact for graduation. Beyond the economic impact, there's also a social impact. Graduates are much less likely to be in prison, get divorced, live in poverty, be unemployed, have poor health, or utilize public assistance. So all of these things increase when you drop out of high school. It is beyond an individual or school problem, though. That economic impact goes far beyond the individual. 2016-17 in Kansas, we had 3,500 dropouts, which equated to about 19 each and every school day. The cost to society for each of those individuals was about $292,000 in lost earnings, taxes, and productivity over their lifetime. So those 2016-17 dropouts, unless they go on to get a diploma or some other certification, will cost approximately $1 billion to the economy over their lifetime. And that's for each one of those graduating classes. So that number gets expounded upon a great deal. Why do students drop out? According to research done by the National Dropout Prevention Center out of Clemson University, the number 5 reason was they couldn't keep up with the schoolwork. And I'm sure most of these will be of no surprise to you when they come up. You'll be shaking your heads. 4, they didn't like school. 3, poor or failing grades. 2, thought the GED was easier. Those of you that know anything about the GED realize that this is definitely not true. The GED is a tough exam. In fact, it's designed so that 40% of high school graduates would not pass the GED. So when they say they're just going to go get their GED, we know that that is a fallacy for them. But the number 1 reason that students drop out of high school is because they miss too many days of school. Attendance is the number 1 reason. Almost 50% of the students in this survey identified attendance as a reason that they did not complete high school. Now, there's other reasons as well. You've got work, pregnancy, felt they didn't belong, didn't feel safe. There are other reasons, but the number 1 reason is attendance. When we talk about dropping out, it centers around the ABCs of dropping out. You'll see this in literature all over the place. Attendance, behavior, and coursework. We're going to focus today on attendance as the ABC of dropping out that we want to look at. And we're not just talking about unexcused absences. This is excused and unexcused absence. Any reason that a student would miss a day of instruction. Why does attendance matter? Lack of attendance, as we saw in the previous slides from the research from the National Dropout Prevention Center, number one reason students drop out of school. The reasons that they don't attend may be varied, but that fact that they are missing school, falling behind, and it's a slow process of becoming less and less attached and engaged in school. There's a correlation between attendance and reading on grade level in third grade, in passing your classes in ninth grade, and ultimately in graduation. It's intuitive, right? We know that when you aren't in school, you can't benefit from an education. You can't build those relationships. You don't benefit from instruction. And the interventions and supports that we all have to try to make sure that these students are getting everything that they need, they're not there. So research backs up what we know intuitively. We used to talk a lot about average daily attendance, that 95% or whatever percentage is of your students that are showing up each day. That's how many students are attending school. What's more important, and what we're starting to look at now and collect data on, is chronic absenteeism. Which students are missing school. That's more important. Any student that misses 10% or more of school days for any reason, excused, unexcused, or otherwise, they are chronically absent. And we're talking about 10% of membership days. If you are in November and that student has missed 10 or 15 days, they might not have gotten to the 10% of 180 days or 186 school days, so they're not at that 18 absences. But if they've missed 10 or 15 days by November, you've got a problem on your hands with that student. That is a process that had already started. So identifying those students early is critical. And you can find your chronic absenteeism data in the Authenticated Applications under the AMOS tab. This is why chronic absenteeism is more important to look at than average daily attendance. These are actual districts in the state of Kansas. Average daily attendance, if you look at the first column, 93.5%, 93% is an A, things look pretty good. But when you look at their chronic absenteeism, 19% of their students are missing 10% or more of days. So that ADA is telling you how many students are showing up each day, but that chronic absenteeism is telling you which students aren't showing up, and that 19% is who we need to focus on. You go across the column, 98.9% ADA is very good, 2.3% chronically absent. You can go all the way over to the right, even 97% ADA. That's good. Almost 10% students chronically absent. We need to identify those kids early, find out why they're missing, and try to make sure that they're at school so that they can benefit from the education. What does it mean to be absent? In each of your districts, you have a list of things that are considered absent, whether they be excused or unexcused. That's up to you as a district, as a building. Whoever is appointed by the district to determine that can decide whether they're excused or unexcused. Now, that plays a part in truancy, right? Skipping. If they're unexcused for 3 consecutive days, 5 days in a semester, 7 days in a year, that's truancy. We have a procedure for that in law that we have to follow. But for the rest of it, those days add up as well, whether it's illness or emergency or disciplinary action from school or whatever the situation is, those absences add up and have an impact. So clearly defining what is absent, what does it mean to be counted absent? On the flip side of that, and just as importantly, is what is present. And it seems sort of obvious, but it's more nuanced than that a little bit. You have present, sitting in the desk, in the building, during the school day, that's obviously present. But if that student is in a non-traditional setting, they're homebound, they're in the hospital, they're off campus getting instruction, if that instruction is coming from a licensed teacher, that student is in attendance, they're present. Disciplinary action, if that student is in ISS, that student should be counted as present as well. Out of the building, if they're on a field trip, they have work study, they're under direct supervision of staff, out learning in the community, those students should be present as well. Out of the building, for co-curricular or extracurricular activities, you have a bus that leaves early going to a band event or a football game or whatever it is, FFA, doesn't matter, those students should be counted present as well. Now, present in the seat, in the building, and present because you're on a school activity trip, you don't need to code those things the same in your SIS. You want to know that that student wasn't in the building but was benefiting from education. So if you want to use an SA for school activity, or you're going to use ISS for the disciplinary, whatever those things are that you want to use so that data means something to you in your district, you should do that. But on the back side of your SIS, that school activity should equal present. How do we impact attendance? There are two spheres of influence here. There's things we can't control, and then there's things we can directly control. The things we can't control, but hopefully we can influence. Those parent stressors, things that are going on in the parents' lives that make it difficult for them to get their children to school. Maybe it's health issues on the parents' part. Transportation, don't have a reliable car, can't get them to the bus stop on time. Parents work odd hours and are sleeping when the kids are supposed to be going to school. Neighborhood safety, chronic illness. Here we're talking a lot about diabetes, we're talking about asthma, and then the sibling effect, where whether it's a single parent home or a home where both parents are working and a younger child gets ill and the older child has to stay home to take care of that sick younger child, that sibling effect. We can't control those things, but we can influence them. How can we influence them? How can we make sure that parents know, if it's possible, there's other transportation alternatives? Public busing, if you live in a larger city, maybe you have some sort of parent tree that they can call for rides. Depends on your community. These things will vary from community to community, but we can't just throw our hands up and say we can't do anything about it, because it's going to impact our attendance and it's going to impact those kids' education. Parental misunderstandings, especially in the early grades. A lot of people feel the early grades aren't important. They've got a lot of time to catch up, so a few absences here or there they won't really matter. Only consecutive absences matter. If you miss Monday and are back Tuesday, and you miss Wednesday and you're back Thursday, Friday, it doesn't really matter, because you come back and you make up the work and everything's okay. If they bunch together, then that's a big deal. Absences are okay as long as the parent signs off. Now, as far as truancy goes, in your district, again, what you mark as unexcused and excused is a local decision, but that idea that just because the parent said it's okay, there's nothing you can do about it, or nothing you can really do to influence that. We need to make sure we still are addressing that and really showing the importance of daily attendance. And then attendance just as legal compliance. The only reason they have to come to school is so we can check this box. Well, hopefully the reason they have to come to school is because you've got such great things going on in your school, in your district, that a day's absence really is going to have an impact on that student. Now, these things we can't control. It's not about placing blame. We're not blaming the parents or the student, because that doesn't get us anywhere. We can point the finger and say, well, there's nothing we can do about that. We have to find a way to work with our communities, work with our parents, work with our students, so that we can influence these things and get our kids to school. Now, there are things, though, that we can directly influence and control. Policies and procedures. Policies, we're talking about board policies, things that are enacted by your local school board. Procedures are what you do in your building, the processes of taking attendance and how you handle those things. So one of the first questions you need to know and find out and think about, what is your district policy for what an absence is? If you miss 1 hour in the morning, do you consider that absent for the entire morning? Some schools have done that. Is it 2 hours? Is it, if they miss more than 50% of the available hours, morning, afternoon, or per period, is that what makes it an absence? State law says that it has to be a substantial part of the school day. That's what makes it an absence. Other than that, it's left to the individual district. Federal guidance says that substantial means more than 50%. So if your student is missing less than 50%, that student for that day could still be considered present. Now, you want to make sure that you know where that kid was during that time that they missed. So whether you have a late or a tardy or whatever your code is that means something to you, you can use that locally. But as far as on the back end, on whether they're there that day or not, the attendance for that day, you can say if it's more than 50% absent, they're absent. Less than 50% absent, they're present. And that's the guidance we would give. Look at your procedures for taking attendance. Who takes attendance? When do they take attendance? How do they take attendance? And then who can change that attendance? Can a classroom teacher do it? Do they inform the office via email? Do they send the kid to the office? What are your procedures for taking attendance to make sure that you're tracking that student as closely to the minute as possible? We want to make sure that we're accounting where that student is at all times. That should be the same throughout your district. There are a lot of districts where one school is doing it one way, another school is doing it another way, another school does it a third way. It's important that you do that the same through your district. And one of the main reasons is you only have to teach it once then to parents and students. If your elementary school has the same definition, same procedures that your middle school and high schools do, then that carries forward and you're speaking the same language for all of those K to 12 years. The parents, students, and school are all on the same page through that whole process. One of the other areas to really look at as far as attendance is that transition years from elementary to middle school, whether that's 5th grade to 6th grade or 6th to 7th, depending on how you set it up, and then from middle school to high school, going into those freshman year. If we look at chronic absentee rates throughout the state, this is 16-17 data. Total chronic absenteeism for the state, 13.7%. You can see you start off in kindergarten and first grade, and that number is, a little bit higher, 11.49 and 9.27. Those are kids and sometimes parents who are getting accustomed to school, dealing with that separation, maybe a little bit more illness because they're out with more kids than they've been out with before. So you have that bump in absenteeism there. And then it goes down throughout the elementary years. And when you get to 5th, 6th grade and 6th, 7th grade, we get another bump there. And that bump has to do with that transition because they've had somebody they've had a relationship with, hopefully, all the way from K to 5 or K to 6. And now they're transitioning to a new building. They don't have the relationships. It's a brand new world, and it can take some adjustment, and it has an impact on attendance. They don't want to go to school. They feel a little bit sick, so they want to stay home. They're scared of the environment. Whatever it is, whatever those things are, those transitions need to be meaningful, and we need to really look at them so that we don't take that hit in attendance. Same thing happens between 8th and 9th grade. A 3% jump between 8th and 9th grade in chronic absenteeism because you're going from, again, those relationships, that known to the unknown, and it has an impact on attendance rates. I'll just go back for 1 second. If you look on here to districts that have a higher rate of chronic absenteeism, those transition years are even more pronounced. There are some districts where there's a 10-12% jump in those transition years. Again, looking at your district data, your school data to see what it says regarding attendance will let you know if this is an issue for you and how you might need to be more intentional with those transitions. What does this mean for you as a district, you as a school? You need to look at the process of the ABCs of dropping out. And again, today we're talking about attendance, and that's a good place to start. You really need to look at your data in a team setting. You need more than one set of eyes. You need more than one set of opinions. You need more people discussing this issue in order to really make a dent in it. So you form your team. Who's on that team? Your attendance clerk. Whoever does your attendance should be on that team. A building administrator, teachers, nurses if there are a lot of health concerns in your community, if asthma or whatever it is having an impact on attendance. If there's a lot of sickness, get the school nurse involved. And then based on your community, it could be any number of other people. Whoever you think has ties to the community, has ties to your students, is able to make an impact in attendance, get them on your committee. You need to look at the data for your school. We can look at statewide data, we can look at these national research studies, and we can make these generalizations, and we can say, yes, those things are probably affecting my school, my district, but you really need to look at your data to see how big that impact is. The reason the kids are absent in District A may be different, very different, than the reason that kids are absent in District B. Once you look at the data and you find out why your kids are absent, identify the interventions that you already have. What are you already doing? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look at the interventions you're doing, and then look at it from a standpoint of where are we strong, where do we need to build a little bit to get more capacity to impact attendance. Once you've identified those interventions, it's key to identify those students early. You cannot wait until they get to 18 absences or 19 absences to the 10% of the total year. You have to intervene early and try to stem that tide before it gets to that point. Because by that point, if you get to 18 absences in January, they've created a pretty good habit of their attendance, and you want to try to address that as early as possible. Implement your interventions, monitor, see if they're working, adjust, and repeat. And you want to try to intervene with the largest group possible. You don't want to try to individualize every single intervention from the get-go. You're going to wear yourself out. If 5 or 6 or 7 kids have the same sort of pattern, do you have an intervention that can deal with all 6 of those 7 kids at one time? If it works for 5 of them and 1 or 2, you have to do something individual, do that. But try to hit it in a group aspect first if you can. And then you just have to reevaluate that process annually. Is it working? Do we need to look at other interventions? Are we having an impact in attendance? And then is that impact in attendance translating into less students repeating grades, more students being on track for reading in 3rd grade, higher ACT scores, better post-secondary results? Just reevaluate that process. If you have any questions regarding anything to do with chronic absenteeism, you would like us to come out and help you look at your data, help you set up a team, sit in on some meetings, look at your policies and procedures. That's what we're here for. Brandon Johnson is the Assistant Director in charge of graduation. His contact information is on the screen. Again, I'm John Girodat, and my contact information is there as well. We would be more than happy to assist you any way we can to impact attendance, which will then impact hopefully our graduation rate and the success that our students have moving forward in the future. Thank you.
Hi, this is Julie Ewing, and I am going to give you some updates today on kindergarten readiness. The outcome for kindergarten readiness is to ensure that each child enters kindergarten at age 5 socially, emotionally, and academically prepared for success. Now, to do this, we're going to give the Ages and Stages questionnaire beginning this fall. It's going to be a snapshot, and the collection window will be August 1st to September 20th. Just to review what the Ages and Stages questionnaire is going to measure, there are 2 different surveys. The first one is an ASQ3, and you can see the different areas that the ASQ3 will measure: communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and some personal and social. Then we have a second survey, the ASQ SE2, and the SE is the social emotional, and parents will be able to answer questions on how their child can regulate emotions and interact positively with others. Now, last fall, we held a snapshot training of trainers, and that was 9 locations across the state. Now, the trainings were well attended, and we had over 600 kindergarten teachers, administrators, and support staff. And the people that came to that training are now trained to give the training. So if they attended a training, if 2 teachers from your district went to the training and they come back, you don't need to send anybody else to other trainings. You can have the people that attended this snapshot training of trainers and have them train your staff. They have the materials, everything that they need to train your staff. So the district level trainers are going to train your teachers on the use and implementation of the ASQ materials. Districts will need to determine a training schedule to get all of their staff trained. And remember that the data collection will begin August 1st to September 20th. So you can begin the training right now all the way up until August 1st. If for some reason your staff was not able to attend any of the trainings and you don't have service centers that can train you or local districts, we do have an ASQ online training available. It's going to be in 3 sessions, but you're going to want to attend the 3 sessions because the 3 sessions are about different parts of the ASQ. Now we recommend that you have your staff train you or you get a face-to-face training, but if that is not possible, we have online training available. You can register for this at the KSDE TASN site. You're going to click on the calendar of events to register, and registration is free, but you will need to register before you will have access to get the information that you will need to sign up for the online training. Just a reminder, we have quite a few buildings that already have the ASQ online access, but there are still a few that do not. Those buildings have been contacted and received an email with this survey link, but just a reminder that each building will need to have a designated ASQ online contact person. You can fill out the Survey Monkey and get that information to us. If you already have one person that is the contact, you don't need another one. You just need one contact person per building. And then that person will be able to assign users as needed. If you still haven't purchased your ASQ starter kits, there's still time. You need to visit the Ages and Stages website that's listed here and get those ordered, and you will still have time to receive the discount that has been given to Kansas. This is a great site, and I just wanted to remind you that the agesandstages.com/KS is a web page that is a great one to bookmark. It has a lot of information, and it is just designed for Kansas kindergarten readiness. So if you look on the left side, there's information on how to order the ASQ if you haven't done that yet. Frequently asked questions, and they are updated weekly on questions that people from the field are asking. We have quick reference guides, how-to videos, just a lot of resources that you should take advantage of. In the right-hand corner is the login, where you will log into the ASQ online system, and that's why you need your contact person, so they have that information. There's newsletters, and there's even a contact us. There's Brooks has customer service personnel waiting to answer your questions. So it's a great, great site. So great, I've listed it twice. It's on here, and then as well as our KSDE Kindergarten Readiness webpage. So keep those bookmarked and look at those for updated information. And if you still have questions, you can contact us. The earlylearning@ksde.org email is available, and then Tiffany and her information and mine are also on the screen. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Good afternoon and welcome to our hot topics of equitable services for students and teachers in private schools. I am Tate Toedman, the Assistant Director on the Early Childhood Special Education and Title Services team. I also am currently serving as the private school ombudsman for the Kansas State Department of Education. As spring starts, this is a good reminder to our public schools. This is the time of year to start working with our private school officials on planning for the needs and services of our private school students and teachers under Title I, II, III, and Title IV-A for the 2018-2019 school year. We're going to review some of the requirements and give some helpful hints of how our public and private school officials can work together. Some of the keys to equitable service requirements are timely and meaningful consultation. So that is one reason we encourage districts to start working with their private schools in the spring. So both the public and private schools can start the planning and programs can be in place at the start of the school year in both the public and private schools. It also needs to be meaningful. It's just not a nice greet and meet. It's actually talking and having discussions to meet the needs of the private school students and teachers. These students and teachers should have an opportunity to participate in activities that are equivalent to those provided in the public schools to the public school students and teachers. During the process of consultation throughout the year, the district and the private schools should address, evaluate, and assess the needs of the private school students and teachers. These benefits and services need to meet the needs of the private school students and teachers. One of the things you're not hearing is to meet the needs of the private school itself, because that is not what these programs are meant to do. It is specifically to benefit the teachers and the students in the private schools. And then one other key that we note on this slide is that we need to be spending an equal amount of funds per student to provide services. The KSDE provides the amounts per private school share for all districts in Titles 2A, 3, and 4 when we put out preliminary and final allocations. The amount per pupil for Title I is determined when the public schools at their district level do their local consolidated plan, also known as the LCP application, typically in August or early September. One of the new positions that came about through the reauthorization of ESEA, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, was the Ombudsman. The 2017-2018 school year was the first year where an Ombudsman was required. This year, I, Tate Toedman, have served in this position, and for the 2018-19 year, I will continue to work in this position along with our new Ombudsman, who will be taking over many of the responsibilities, Dr. Linda Aldridge. The key for the Ombudsman is to help work with the public and private school officials to make sure that the private school children, teachers, and other personnel receive the services equitable to those in public schools. And it's the role of the SEA to monitor and enforce the Title I and the Title VIII equitable services requirements. Some of the other responsibilities of the Ombudsman also include working with the SEA staff administering Title I and the Title VIII to develop monitoring protocols, which we have at the Kansas State Department of Education, and also to make sure that all these protocols are followed in each program. We've done that in our monitoring process, which many of our districts are going through currently through Cohort 3, and next year it'll be Cohort 1 that will be going through the monitoring protocols. Another requirement of the Ombudsman is they should be the primary point of contact for responding to and resolving any complaints regarding equitable services. And in Kansas, we're proud to say that most of the times we hear complaints, it's after the fact where the districts and the publics and the private schools have worked well together to complete their complaint, to solve it at the local level. That's what we always encourage. There's many times we provide information to both the public and private school as they're working through the issues they may have. At this point, for the 2017-18 school year, we have received no official complaints, which tells us how well our districts and private schools are doing. However, if we have any private school officials that do not agree with this, we strongly encourage them to work with their public school officials, and if things cannot be resolved, please contact myself at the department, and I will work with you in the public schools to make sure that equitable services are being provided to the teachers and students in the private schools. The biggest goal to the consultation process is agreement between the LEA and the private school officials on how the equitable and effective programs for the eligible private school children will occur. And that's why we encourage to start planning in the spring. So once the fall semester starts, both the public and private school students will be able to start in their programs immediately at an appropriate time in the fall. You'll hear throughout this presentation how important communication between our private school officials and our public school officials is. We strongly encourage at least one, if not multiple, in-person meetings to help with this communication at the start of the year. We've also seen many successful consultations occur where the public schools have actually met at the private schools, especially in smaller districts where there may only be one private school. A lot of times what we find out is we have staff working in cities or towns and they've actually never stepped foot in the private schools, and a lot of times that's a good way to see what's going on in our schools, especially if we're going to be supporting services and programs in our private schools. But communication is of utmost importance. These type of activities also help with dealing and providing positive relationships. Because if and when conflicts may occur, if we have good relationships, it's going to be much easier to share where we have concerns and where we can work things out. So if we can start with and develop positive relationships between our public and private schools, the teachers receiving the services and the students receiving the services will receive the best services possible. And that's why we really push good communication and good relationships throughout the process of consultation. So what should happen during the consultation process? Under ESEA, the United States Department of Education and Congress has expanded what should be included in consultation. So this will be the second year that these new areas are part of the consultation. However, many of our districts and private schools already discuss these. These are now just things that are mandated and will be shown on the consultation forms KSDE provides for districts to use for the 2018-19 school year. The determination of how proportionate share of funds is determined. KSDE makes this fairly easy for districts because we do all of the mathematical figuring for districts. We figure the 2A, 3, and Title 4A funds directly for the districts to say how much each share of private school funds need to be allocated to the private schools. We do not say how much per private school if a district has multiple, but just the total amount. And then in our local consolidated plan is where the local public school determines the amount of Title I funding for the private schools in their catchment area. Another thing that became new this year in the consultation forms was it directly had to be talked about whether the public school was going to provide the services themselves, provide through a different government agency, a consortium, or a third-party contractor. It also needs to be discussed whether to pool funds for equitable services. When we see this is typically our larger school districts that may do this. And another one that's really important and why we encourage districts and private schools to start consulting in the spring is when, including the approximate time of day that services will be provided, and whether to consolidate Title I equitable service funds with funds available for other services to private school children and other SEA programs. The key here is if we wait until the fall to start doing this, our private school students do not start at the same time receiving services as our public school students. And they should be starting their Title I programs or any other type of programs they receive at the same time as the public school students. Some other changes that came about for the 2017-18 school year that continue into the 18-19 is the written affirmation that consultation has occurred must provide the option for private schools to indicate that such officials believe that timely and meaningful consultation has not occurred. So what the KSDE has done is we've added a statement with a blank for the private school officials to initial if they agree that meaningful consultation has not occurred. This year we did contact many private schools where this was not initialed. Many of them, because this was the first year, did not initial it, were not made aware of it, but did feel meaningful consultation did occur. However, we had a couple districts that did not, so we worked with them and the private school officials because the private school officials did not feel that it occurred. And so we were able to educate our public school officials how to better work with the private school officials in making sure they understood all of their rights through meaningful consultation. So where in the law are the equitable service provisions? In Title I, they are found in Section 1117 of ESEA, and Titles 2 through 8 are in Sections 8501 through 8504. Title 8, the uniform provisions, also in the ESEA. So Title I is covered in Title I. So what is covered in Title 8? Well, in Title 8, these are the following programs that are covered. The Migrant Program, or Title I Part C. Title II Part A, Supporting Effective Instruction, where most people think of professional development. Title III Part A, our English language acquisition for our English learners. Title IV Part A, Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. Excuse me. That was a new program for the 2017-18 school year. And for the 2018-19 school year, we are having to use a different formula to determine the allocations. We've also seen that Congress has passed the new omnibus budget bill, so we are expecting increases for our smaller districts. It looks at this point, based on preliminary information, that all districts will receive $10,000 in Title IV Part A. Our larger districts will receive more than $10,000. So all districts will receive this funds. That means the private schools in their area will also receive some private school shares. So for about 40 of our districts, they'll be seeing approximately the same amount as last year or large cuts, especially from our bigger districts because of the formula changes we are having to impose. But all districts are expected to receive at least $10,000. And then the other one, Title IV Part B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And this is typically done through the competitive grant process where the private schools and public schools should be consulting during the grant process when our public schools are applying for those grants. For 2018-19, as I mentioned before, there will be no new changes expected to the consultation form, and the KSDE will soon have this form available out on our website. When we talk about consultation, it should be a continuous cycle throughout the school year. And this is one excellent resource that the United States Department of Education has provided us through, showing us how it goes throughout the year. It shouldn't be that we talk once or twice a year and then hope everything takes care of itself. It should be ongoing, at least one, if not multiple, in-person meetings between the public officials and private officials, and then continued through public or private and public phone calls, emails, as the process goes on throughout the year. On the left side, you see all the information that's always had to be shared in consultation through NCLB and now currently with the Every Student Succeeds Act. And on the right are 4 new areas to consultation that I mentioned earlier in this webinar. A good reminder for all public and private schools is any services provided by federal funds, materials, or equipment must be secular, neutral, non-ideological, and supplemental in nature, not supplanting what the private school would otherwise provide absent the federal education services. Another change in 2017-2018 that continues is the obligations of funds. Any funds allocated to the LEA for educational services and other benefits to our private school children, teachers, and other educational personnel and families must be obligated in the fiscal year for which the funds are received by the LEA. In other words, the private school share should not be carried over. So our public and private school officials really need to make sure they're planning and have a plan to make sure the funds are obligated during the correct fiscal year. Anytime a district is having to ask for carryover of the private school share, they'll have to go through the state ombudsman and have to show that there's an extraordinary circumstance. And as you may have seen on other slides and also on this slide, we have the reference where the information about this can be found if you have further questions, or you may contact myself. We mentioned the proportionate share earlier, and this is just an example from federal guidance of how proportionate share is determined. Now, it shows a district that has 4 attendance areas, shows the number of public school low income and private school low income, along with the total amount. So in this example, the school district receives $1 million in Title I funds. 90% of the low income students are from the public schools, 10% are from the private schools. Under this easy math, that would mean the public school share of Title I funds is $900,000 and the private school is $100,000. For our public schools, they input all the numbers from their district and the private school officials into the local consolidated plan, and our system figures out the amount of funds that go to the private schools. Districts with multiple private schools will then have to divide out. Again, you can use the per pupil funding of the low school income to determine what amount of dollar amount of services are to be provided to those students. If there are complaints, the time frame that an SEA has for responding to a complaint from parents, teachers, or other individuals is stated in Section 8501 of the SEA. And we have 45 days to address that complaint. And then in addition to that, the Secretary of Education must investigate and resolve any appeal of the SEA's resolution within 90 days if it is appealed above the SEA. Here is just a brief screenshot of our title services for non-public page to show you some of the resources. We'll be updating the link to the district consultant. Every district in Kansas has been assigned a consultant, and we are working on the new list of consultants who will be working with our districts for the 18-19 school year, and that will be updated. We have some fact sheets. We have an Adobe Connect webinar from the past. And we continue to update this page. So we encourage people to go to our title services for non-public schools. And even at this point, you will see a more updated page than what is on this screenshot. Some other resources are the Office of Non-Public Education. They have many good resources on their website. You can also sign up for their listserv. You typically get anywhere from about 1 to 3 listservs a month. The non-regulatory guidance, and we also have the non-regulatory guidance posted on our website. There are still 3 guidance documents that are currently appropriate to be using. There's now, as we put on this first one, except as amended, the following 2 remain applicable. These 2 are from the No Child Left Behind era. Title I Services to Eligible Private School Children Guidance, and Title IX Part E Uniform Provisions. That is under NCLB. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, Title IX became Title VIII. So when I talked about Title VIII previously, it was Title IX before, so that is why the guidance for this is Title IX. And then some other resources for ESSA is listed there for the link. And then our link to our web page is there also. So we want to thank you for tuning in to our title services for non-public students. And reminder that Kansas is going to lead the world in the success of each student. And when we talk about each student, that includes our public and private school students.
Good afternoon. This is Tateman, Assistant Director of the Early Childhood Special Education and Title Programs team. And over the next few minutes, we're going to discuss the Every Student Succeeds Act and how there have been changes to the supplement, not supplant rules regarding Title I programs. And as a reminder, all our federal programs have supplement, not supplant rules, which are basically those rules that are telling us that we cannot use our federal dollars to replace dollars otherwise that we get from state and local funds. So we just can't start spending our federal dollars in place of those funds we already have. And this slide kind of talks about that. There's really no changes in ESSA when it comes to the supplement, not supplant, being able to replace funds. We still cannot replace those state and local funds that LEAs would typically spend on the Title I schools if they were not Title I. So this is saying that Title I schools are to get all the money any other schools in their district are not Title I are receiving. Title I schools are receiving these funds above and beyond the local and state funds that these buildings already receive. One of the keys in ESSA is it's changed how we determine supplement, not supplant, especially with targeted assisted schools. Overall, the changes in ESSA are very similar to what the rules in school-wide used to be. And one of the keys that we're going to talk about is how LEAs have to demonstrate this compliance and what their requirements are to show the SEA, or in this case, the Kansas State Department of Education, what they're doing to show that they are supplementing the programs in Title I schools and not supplanting the state and local funding. And this comes from Section 1118B2, and this is the exact wording from the law. To demonstrate compliance, a local education agency or school district shall demonstrate that the methodology used to allocate state and local funds to each school receiving assistance under Title I Part A ensures that such school receives all of the state and local funds it would otherwise receive if it were not receiving assistance under Title I Part A. And this is a really big piece of Title I and ESEA, because over history it's been shown that many poor schools that are receiving federal funds do not receive the same amount of state and local funds as their non-Title I buildings. So this is the assurance that our school districts are spending the same amounts at the building level with state and local funds for all buildings, non-title and title, and that the Title I funds are a bit above and beyond for those Title I buildings. One of the interesting things we've had since the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act is we had regulations put out by the United States Department of Ed that have been later rescinded by either, in some cases, the Department of Ed, some cases, the President. But Congress and the Department of Ed did not agree on the regulations that were originally passed, and so those regulations have been rescinded. However, there are some good parts to those regulations that have shown that the Department of Ed supports certain things. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next few slides. There are still requirements that are mentioned in the regulations that are still law, but how districts prove that they are supplementing, not supplanting, is the key, and we'll talk about some of the differences. In the rescinded regulations, the United States Department of Education gave school districts 4 options. On the next few slides, since this has been rescinded, we're just sending these out as examples. And we would highly encourage districts to use either example 1, 2, or 4 that we're going to talk about on the next few slides. The 2 bullets on this part talk about what an LEA must do. And on this slide it says annually, and because of the rescinded regulations, we're double checking with the Department of Ed and waiting for more guidance from them. But we do know that LEAs must submit their methodology for allocating state and local funds in a format and language parents and the public can understand. So we can infer to some extent this information will have to be made public and in a way that the public can understand this information. The second bullet here talks about demonstrating at such time and in such form as the SEA may reasonably require. So yes, KSDE will be providing more information on how this information needs to be sent to KSDE, some ideas and suggestions of how districts may put this out to the public. That this methodology it uses gives each of these Title I schools all of their normal state and local funds it would otherwise receive if it were not a Title I school. So basically this is a transparency issue. The United States Department of Ed and especially Congress is really big on transparency and making sure that we can show the public that yes, we're spending the same amount of local and state funds in our Title I buildings as in our non-Title I, and our Title I funds should supplement that. Down below we have a couple asterisks because this is where I mentioned before in the original regulations there were 4 options. We're just talking about these as examples. Since the United States Department of Ed put these out originally in the regs as options, these are things that they were okay with and were pushing school districts to use to demonstrate their compliance with supplement, not supplant. So we're going to briefly go through all 4, and like I said before, and it'll make more sense when we get to the slide, we are encouraging options 1, 2, or 4. And again, these are examples, and if a district has other ways to show that they're supplementing, not supplanting, it is our understanding that will suffice because these regulations have been rescinded. But you'll see in the 4th example that really, if you don't like what the options or examples 1 and 2, number 4 gives you a lot more to work with. So example 1 is the weighted per pupil. And this is when districts distribute to their schools the majority or almost all of the state and local funds that are available to the school district through a per pupil formula where students with educational disadvantage, such as poverty students, English learners, students with disabilities, generate more money for their schools. And we mentioned the 3 educational disadvantages below, but it is not limited to these three. These are the three that are particularly seen in the law being represented throughout different parts of ESSA as disadvantaged groups. Example 2 is an average personnel and non-personnel cost. In this example, money is distributed to schools. Again, almost all of the state and local funds available to the district through a consistent resource formula where each Title I school receives at least these two following things: the average district-wide salary for each category of school personnel multiplied by the number of school personnel in each category assigned to the school under the formula, and the average district-wide expenditures for non-personnel resources multiplied by the number of students in the school. Example 3, I'm not going to talk about. This was an option in the regulations for state established compliance test. Where I want you to focus is the last sentence on this slide. KSDE is not doing this at this time. So basically, this is not an option. And example 4, which is called the special rule. An LEA or school district may use any methodology to distribute state and local funds as long as it results in that school district spending at least as much per pupil in Title I schools as the average amount spent per pupil in non-Title I, as reported under Section 1111H1CX. So spending in Title I schools may vary and can vary up to 5% of the average spending in non-Title I schools in a given year. So definitely there is some flexibility with this rule. An LEA can exclude any school with less than 100 students. And on future slides, we're going to talk more about small schools and small school districts. An LEA or school district may demonstrate compliance if it demonstrates that one or more of the non-Title I school gets extra money to serve a high proportion of students with disabilities, English learners, or students from low-income families, which disproportionately affects the average spending in non-Title I schools. But again, we need to be showing that our Title I schools are receiving all the state and local funds equivalent to what it would receive if it was not a Title I school. So here are 3 flexibilities that go with all those options, whether you choose options number 1, number 2, or number 4. This is where a lot of our smaller districts or buildings with one building at each grade level will feel much better about supplement, not supplant rules. The first one here, we talk about how school districts can demonstrate compliance under any of the options on a district-wide or grade span basis. So a district can put together all their elementary, middle school, and high schools and compare them to each other. However, a district could also choose just to compare their elementary schools to elementary schools, their middle schools to middle schools, and their high schools to high schools. This is similar to other areas of federal programs where we can divide up our schools by the type of schools. So we get asked a lot of times, can we compare a K-5 to a K-8? No, we cannot. We can compare K-5s to K-5s. We can compare 6-8s to 6-8s. And so sometimes those districts, it becomes a little more of a difficulty, but it can be done. The second one is of most importance to our smaller districts and districts with one building at each grade level. An LEA or school district is not required to demonstrate compliance with supplement, not supplant, if it has a single school. Example, a K-12 building would not be required to do that. Basically, they don't have anything to compare it to. Or in any grade span with a single school. So if you only have one elementary, one middle, and one high school, you do not have to do this. However, we have some of our smaller districts that may have 2 or 3 elementaries, one middle, and one high school. We would recommend that you compare your by grade span basis. So you only compare your elementary schools to elementary schools. If you wish, you may compare your elementary schools in this example where I said 3 elementaries, one middle, and one high school. You can compare all 5, but again, we would recommend you do it by grade span, so your high school would have nothing to compare to, your middle school would have nothing to compare to, and you would just look at supplement, not supplant with your elementary schools. And the third one, a school district may exclude supplemental state or local funds spent for programs that meet the intents and purposes of the Title I program. A couple other areas is with our district-wide activities. If those Title I schools receive a share of those activities that are equal to or greater than the share it would otherwise receive if it is not a Title I school, and if it distributes almost all of the state and local funds available to it for current expenditures, and they define current expenditures as administration, instruction, attendance and health services, pupil transportation services, operation and maintenance of the plant, fixed charges, and net expenditures to cover deficits for food services and student body activities. And those could be for administration programs like summer school, curriculum development, preschool, data analysis, anything like that can be considered administration or district-wide activities. So as you can tell, with supplement not supplant, the Department of Ed and the ESSA law have given many flexibilities of how we can determine supplement not supplant. But when push comes to shove, it comes back to what I've talked about many times before. We have to make sure our Title I schools, that Title I money is above and beyond what our other buildings are receiving. So for our timelines, originally a lot of things were by December 10th of 2017, but that's been extended by December 10th, 2018. Our LEAs have to be able to demonstrate a methodology for meeting supplement not supplant no later than the 2018-19 school year. And the key there, it has to demonstrate. At this point, KSDE has not determined how school districts will submit the information to KSDE, but we need districts to be thinking about that at this point. Ideally, you would be able to use this determination you make of what methodology you will be using to determine this and have it in place for the 18-19 school year. However, it does state that the districts do have no later than the 2019-20 school year. So if you determine a methodology for the 18-19 school year and you're having issues with it working out, or it's more complicated than what you choose to and you'd like to use another option, technically that would be available. But we're expecting to receive methodologies in a form to be determined later from school districts. But full implementation, if it hasn't started in the school district for the 18-19 school year, must be in place for the 19-20. The last bullet on there was in the regulations. We do not believe that this is really going to change because the NCLB rules most people consider more stringent than the new flexibilities. But we have not gotten confirmation at this time that you can use those NCLB rules. However, there are some things in there that are best practice, but it is not required. If you have any questions, please send them to essaquestions@ksde.org, or if you have questions for the United States Department of Education over ESSA, you can send those to essa.questions@ed.gov. Once again, we'd like to thank you for all you do for the kids of Kansas as you help Kansans lead the world in the success of each student. Good afternoon. This is Tateman, Assistant Director on the Early Childhood Special Education and Entitled Programs team. And as many of you know, late in March, the U.S. Congress passed a spending bill that has been signed by the President. So at this point, we have a general idea on funding, at least on the national level. At the Kansas level, we do not have that yet. We would hope to receive sometime in April or early May the preliminary numbers from the United States Department of Education, and then that way we can do the state level formulas and hopefully get preliminary allocations out to districts sometime in May, depending on how early we get the numbers from the United States Department of Education. We're going to talk about the programs under ESEA that are listed on this page. We've not included the official names, but more the names that people are more likely to understand and remember what the programs are used for. And as I talk about each program, I'll just do a quick overview to remind people. I will focus mostly on the national funding and just briefly what we expect for the Kansas funding. As like I said before, we do not have preliminary allocations for Kansas. However, we know school districts are budgeting and would like some type of guidance on what to expect. And again, I will say this multiple times, we do not have the preliminary allocations. So these are just estimates that we're going by based on the federal funds and what's in the law under the Every Student Succeeds Act changes to the ESEA Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Title I, which was previously known as our program for disadvantaged students, it's now goes under basic operations. These are the largest ESEA program that all districts in Kansas receive funding for. At the national level, there's a very slight increase in funding. So what do we expect this to mean for Kansas? Overall, as a state, we will be either probably flat funded or see a small decrease. However, because there are so many items that go into the formula, including census data and census poverty data, we would expect that we will probably see some fluctuation of some districts possibly receiving increases in their title funds, some staying about the same, some decreasing. However, our expectation is we will not see drastic changes. And again, we cannot guarantee this, but when it comes to budgeting, that we know this is important to people. Generally speaking, we're going to be flat at Kansas to a slight decrease. Title I Part C, our migrant program at the federal level is flat funded. However, we are in a situation where we know over the next few years we will continually be seeing less money, approximately $1 million a year. So even though that this is flat funded at the national level, we will see a decrease at the state level. And our Assistant Director, Doug Boleyn's been working with school districts in our migrant programs, making them aware of these changes. So Doug would be your contact if you have any questions on that. Title II, which is supporting teachers and leaders. Many of our districts think of this as our professional development program. We also see it used for class size reduction, mentoring, and recruiting. This was on the chopping block of President Trump's original budget, but it was flat funded. However, based on the change in formula under the Every Student Succeeds Act in Kansas, we do expect another decrease overall. So that would mean most districts will see a decrease. There's a very limited chance some districts might see an increase based on population, but we do not expect that to happen. So you would expect probably a small decrease in your Title II funds. Title III, our English Learners program, was flat funded. So based on the number of students you have that qualify as English learners under the Title III program, that will have the biggest effect on whether you see any type of slight increase or slight decrease. Title IV, Part A, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Program, which was brand new to our ESE programs under the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is where there has been a large change. For the 2017-18 school year, there was an allocation made nationally of $300 million. This year, we were expecting between $300 million and $400 million, but Congress passed an appropriation of $1.4 billion nationally. So between 4 and 5 times what states received last year. So what we expect with this and some changes that we've announced before, and we will probably be doing a hot topics over Title IV for the month of May because of the changes and the increased amount of money, is that we are predicting that all school districts will receive at least the minimum of $10,000 in this program. With that said, our 41 districts which received more than 10,000 last year, some of those will be slightly above 10,000, some a little more. However, we want to remind people, like we've talked with before, through different webinars and on personal phone calls, you will not see the amount of Title IV funds you saw last year in our larger districts, because we'll serve all districts at $10,000, and then once that's served, which would be $2.86 million out of our state funding, then we would go back to the formula grant. So our bigger districts will be receiving more money. At this point, we cannot really give you a good estimate, but we can guarantee you it will not be the size that you had last year in some of our larger school districts. Some of the same flexibility rules will be in place for Title IV for reaping those funds for a smaller district or transferring to Title I, III if you receive that fund, or Title II from IV. And we'll go into a lot more detail in our Title IV webinars. Title IV Part B, our 21st Century Community Learning Centers. For the most part, that was flat. Some places are showing a slight increase. At the state of Kansas, we are not expecting any increase in funding, and those are competitive grants, so we see no changes there expected. Title V, which are rural education grants, our SRSA and RLIS grants. The districts that receive this was flat funded also, so we do not expect many changes. And then Title IX under the ESEA was the McKinney-Vento homeless programs. We did see nationally a $10 million increase, which at the national level really does not create a lot of money at the state level when it's divided out across the whole United States. However, we were expecting a decrease in those funds, so this should be able to keep us from seeing a decrease and might give us a slight increase. Those are competitive grants. They're typically done in a 3-year cycle depending on funding allocations. Later this week, or probably earlier, some point during the week this week, those will be put out for competitive grants. They will be due by the end of May to Linda Aldridge on the Early Childhood Special Education and Title Programs team. And those are competitive grants. We're expecting approximately $400,000, maybe a little more once we see the final amounts that we're getting. We'll go out to these competitive grants. Districts will find out if they're being recommended for funding probably sometime in late June or late July, and then they'll go to the August state board meeting for approval. And again, your contact person, if you're interested in that, is Linda Aldridge. So even though we know we haven't given you a lot of specifics, we wanted to give you as best of an update at this point that we can provide. If we have more information for our May hot topics, we will provide that for then. We'll also be getting information out on our listservs and our websites. We'll be available at the Impact Institutes. We'll be presenting information in breakout sessions and in general sessions at our summer leadership academies and conferences. So really pay attention to your emails and look for conferences as we try to keep you as updated as possible as we receive the information. Before we conclude with our funding session, we'd also like to give a heads up, and we'll talk more about this in May and be sending out more information on the LCP listserv. But there will be a change in the LCP application process this summer. Prior to July 1, you'll be receiving, hopefully in May, if not early June, information on going in and doing your assurances for the LCP application. So we encourage you to be looking for that. If you're LCP people, this is a big change. Typically, we do not start the application process until August. However, districts will have to go into and accept the assurances. And we are making changes to make this as easily accessible, and we're trying to get this out as soon as possible this spring. So please make sure you're watching your listservs for the information on the LCP application. This will allow districts to have access to their funds sooner rather than later once we get into the new fiscal year. So again, please look forward to those new instructions. We're trying to make the transition to this required by the U.S. Department of Education as seamless as possible. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Kent Reed. I'm pinch hitting for Stacy Smith and Kathleen Mercer today, and I'd like to share with you some exciting things that we're offering relative to the IPS as well as career advising. Now remember, beginning in 2018-2019 school year, every student in grades 7 through 12 should have an IPS, an individual plan of study. And what we're going to talk about today is that professional development opportunity that we're providing in April and May for $25 per participant to really learn how to advise students, particularly for those who may be teachers. If you're using a seminar model relative to implementing the IPS, this is a great workshop to help those folks learn how to engage students and family. Here's the brochure that we've sent out, and if you have a copy, you can click on any one of those dates to register for the IPS roadshow, this next edition. And what we're trying to do with this roadshow, as I mentioned, is provide a real good basis for career advising. And it's going to involve not only career advising and a couple of models I'm going to show you, but also how the social emotional character development is embedded in that process. Here are the dates, beginning April 9th in Salina, then we'll be in Girard, Sublette, Hayes, Oakley, Topeka, Eudora, Hutchinson, and Clearwater. And one of the tools that we're using is this graphic, which is a really cool way to explain to your staff, to your students, and also family members of those students what the IPS is designed to do. And that is, we're talking about the passion that students have relative to college and career readiness, the mission of what this process is all about. We'll talk about vocation and profession. So it's really an opportunity to help those kids and family members and staff learn more about the IPS and how to implement it. Here's the career development cycle that Joni Clark-Leiker and Jody Grover has put together. And this particular example is in alignment with the Kansas CAN competencies through research collaboration at the University of Kansas. And we'll talk about how students can take action, how they should know themselves, explore options, make choices, and from that centerpiece move outwards toward things like self-regulation. And if you're familiar with research collaboration's work, that's one of the centerpieces. Self-efficacy, critical thinking skills, and conflict management. And all of this is, again, aligned both with the IPS and SECD. And here's a graphic that shows you how well it is aligned with social emotional character development. You'll notice in the left-hand column we have the blue dot is representative of the career development standard, the white dot, personal development standard, and the purple dot, social development standard. So you can see how each one of those components of the career development cycle relates to social emotional character development. With an individual plan of study for each student, Kansas students will be more successful post-high school. To learn more, you can log on to the IPS webpage at ksde.org, the CTE webpage, or through the Twitter account of @KSDE-CTE. Need more assistance? Give Stacy a call, who's the assistant director in charge of CTE on the Career Standards and Assessments team. Kathleen Mercer, who's the coordinator, and then my information, and I'm the school counseling consultant. Hope to see you at one of these workshops. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks.